Hi, my name's Dan Hill, and in this video we're going to talk about how to map foundation skills. Interestingly enough, a lot of people ask me, should we map foundation skills? Why is it important? Well, foundation skills come from the Core Skills for Work framework, and they're designed to replace an older system called employability skills. So you'll see when we go through what foundation skills actually are, how they apply more broadly to work. In this case, we'll also look at a few different units of competency. Some of them have already got the foundation skills mapped to the performance criteria. Others have them simply implied or embedded, and others have them listed but not mapped. So when we're faced with mapping the foundation skills back to our assessments, more often than not, we can simply say that they are covered because they are mapped to performance criteria. But I'll get into it a bit more than that when we have a look at these examples. The Australian government has released a back to basics overview of what foundation skills are. And on this page, I thought I'd bring this up because it does say here, a key outcome from the national strategy is the explicit inclusion of foundation skills into units of competency. So it's now mandatory that every unit of competency describes the language, literacy, numeracy, and employment skills that are essential to performance in that unit. And the list is below. So first of all, we have the language, literacy, and numeracy skills from the Australian Core Skills Framework, which are learning, reading, writing, oral communication, and numeracy. And then we have the employability skills of navigating the world of work, interacting with others, and getting the work done. So that's what the government wants. Let's have a look at units of competency now, and I'll start with one that does include it. So this happens to be a TAE unit, and it's the TAE Del 301. And if we look at the foundation skills listed here, you'll see that each one of them is mapped back to a performance criterion or more from the above unit of competency. So it tells you exactly where these particular skills are included in the unit of competency. So for example, learning is included in performance criteria 4.1, which talks about reflecting upon personal performance. That's learning. Writing is in 1.4 and 1.6, so we might go up and have a look. 1.4 talks about accessing and reviewing relevant resources, looking about context, and 1.6 is notifying learners of the details. Both of those could include the practice of writing, such as providing people lesson plans and so on. We'll now look at a unit that talks about having foundation skills embedded. This unit of competency is from the health training package and is the current version of Provide First Aid. If we look under foundation skills here, it just says that foundation skills essential to the performance are explicit in the performance criteria of the unit. What that means is that the performance criteria themselves describe what is needed, and then it's up to the trainer and assessor to understand what particular foundation skill that might apply to. So if we're talking about obtaining consent from a casualty where possible, that's probably an oral communication skill. If we're talking about operating first aid equipment, that might be getting the job done or getting the work done. And finally, recognizing the possible psychological impacts on the self and others would fall under learning. So when we're mapping back to a unit of competency, we would simply say that the foundation skills are implicitly captured within the performance criteria, just like it says here in the unit of competency itself. And we would write that in any validation that we do. And finally, I'll bring up a unit where the foundation skills are listed and they're discussed, and it says in here that they are incorporated in the performance criteria and are required for competent performance of this unit. So rather than guess what each of these performance criteria matches with within the foundation skills, it tells you here what is expected. And it's again up to the assessor to say, okay, well, oral communication. They talk about presenting information. So I'll look back up here, presentations, summarize key concepts. Okay, I can see that oral communication would be used here. So you might see some skills here like problem solving, planning and organizing, initiative and enterprise, self-management and technology. Well, where did they come from? They weren't listed on that document we saw from the Australian government. Well, they are subsets of those headings, such as getting the work done, navigating the world of work, and interacting with others, that are the headings provided in the Core Skills for Work framework. So we don't have to worry too much about that. That's covered more in the language, literacy and numeracy skill set that we also run. Suffice to say at this point in time, they are incorporated under those 3 headings we looked at before. So anyway, we look through the descriptions, we see where those would apply to the unit of competency. So when we map these, we would actually cut these skills out and we would list exactly where in the assessment that those skills are covered. And we would simply look at the descriptions to figure out what within the practical or theory assessment actually covers those skills. So let's now see how we actually map these within an assessment instrument. So I've opened up the assessment instrument here for the TAEDL 301. Now the mapping hasn't been done yet, so we're going to have to make some presumptions here. So I'm going to go to the unit of competency and I'm going to cut and paste the foundation skills from the unit straight into this document. And then with a little bit of movie magic, I'm going to quickly format this so it fits the remainder of the mapping tables just above it. Now what we can do is we can go to the unit of competency and see that learning, for instance, is already mapped to performance criteria 4.1, as we discussed before. So we would go up to the previously mapped performance criteria, and let's just say 4.1 was mapped to question 12, for instance. We could then take that question 12 response and put it into the foundation skills, saying learning is mapped to that performance criteria, therefore it's mapped within the assessment. Reading, if we look at the unit of competency, is mapped to 1.1, 1.2, 1.4 and a few others. So again, we would go up to where we'd already done the mapping and we might see that 1.1 was captured in, say, task 1. 1.2 was captured in task 1 as well, and 1.4 was captured in, let's say, task 2. So we'd scroll back down to the foundation skills, and for reading, we would put task 1 and task 2 in there, and so on and so forth. Now, when we get to a unit of competency that hasn't got that already mapped, that's when we need to read each of the performance criteria, see what foundation skills would match those specific criteria, and then after you've mapped the criteria, come back to the foundation skills and cut and paste what you've found already into there. And that's how you map foundation skills.